For this lesson, we're going to be discussing making prints in the darkroom. And to begin with, we're going to talk about paper, and this is a silver gelatin paper process that we're using. And there are two basic categories of paper. Fiber paper starts out with a real paper base to it, so it's got the qualities and archival qualities of real paper. The paper itself has actually 4 layers to it. The first layer is the substrate, which is the paper. The second level is the bardia, which is used to smooth out the surface of the paper so they don't have all the textures. So it allows us to get sharper images with our emulsion spread over. Our third layer then is the emulsion, and most paper emulsions are a silver bromide emulsion. Those are kind of the classic old papers that we used. Most modern papers are a combination of silver bromide and silver chloride, and they're known as chlorobromide papers. And then finally, there's another light coat of gelatin to seal and protect the image. And of course, when we put that in water and paper and it swells, it allows the chemistry to act on the silver halide emulsion. So we have fiber paper, and then we have resin-coated paper, which is probably what you're going to be using the most. It's less expensive than fiber paper. The paper base is different in that it's a polymer paper base, almost like a plastic, and the emulsion is layered on top of that smooth plastic base. And so for those reasons, the museum quality tends to favor still the fiber-based emulsion because it just takes on the texture and feel of that paper a little bit more. Resin-coated paper, though, modern resin-coated paper is extremely durable, and there are some artists that do use it for fine artwork applications. The tone scale is going to be slightly different between a RC paper and a fiber paper. Traditionally, the fiber paper will have a little deeper black value to it, and I would say that part of that is the idea that the emulsion is embedded in the paper stock as opposed to the resin-coated paper where it's sitting strictly on top of it as a smooth, thin layer. And there's something called veiling or a halo effect that can happen where as light reflects back through the emulsion and we look at the image, those blacks that look really rich when the paper's wet tend to lighten slightly as they dry, whereas with fiber-based paper it actually tends to deepen or darken when it dries, so you have what's known as a dry down effect. I will tell you, for my personal work, and my personal recommendation would be to work with a resin-coated paper to really learn your photography. It's less expensive, the processing times are shorter, the washing times are faster, and the permanence is excellent. It's a really good product. For my personal work, I actually will use a brand of paper like the Ilford family of papers, where if I'm using the same multi-grade 4 emulsion, I will do my test prints on the resin-coated paper. I'll even do proof prints on resin-coated paper, and then if I decide that I want to make this truly a museum quality print, I will change over to the fiber paper, and I'll be able to work very quickly and use less material because I'm able to work up all my test prints on the resin coated and then just make a subtle modification to my printing times when I get to the fiber paper. There are a few characteristics that we look for in paper. The first is the surface quality itself, whether it's got a smooth glossy finish. So here we have a glossy paper stock here, or a semi-gloss, or what Ilford calls a pearl finish. And then finally what we have here is a box of matte paper, which is going to be a very flat, lower contrast appearing paper. The second quality that we have with black and white photographic papers is the overall color of the paper. Believe it or not, even though we're dealing with black and white, we have the paper base itself has a coloration to it. In fact, the brightest value of any print is the paper base, the white, if you will, of that paper. And so there are warm tone paper bases, there are cool tone paper bases. It's kind of like going to the hardware store to the paint selection counter and try to pick a white. There are so many shades of white. So there's an overall color, whether it be a warm tone print or a neutral tone or a cool tone. And then there's the contrast range or the tone scale of a particular paper and developer combination. And so when we were talking about paper, we broke it down to primarily being about whether it's fiber paper or resin-coated paper, and we talked about the different paper surfaces. But actually, before we even get there, we have two categories of black and white paper, which is a graded paper or a multi-grade paper. The term grade in paper refers to the contrast range of how long it takes to get from the paper white to maximum black. And so we can draw that out and form a slope, and that's kind of like when we talk about slope of a road, we're talking about the grade of the paper. And so we have graded paper as a historic traditional paper stock where if I have different contrasts that I need, I have a different box of paper ranging from grade 1 all the way up to grade 5. Well, most modern papers incorporate what's known as a variable contrast emulsion. And in fact, what I'm going to recommend we work with is a variable contrast paper that actually has 3 emulsions combined onto the surface of the paper. And those 3 emulsions are a blue emulsion, which is a low contrast emulsion, a green emulsion, which is a high contrast emulsion. The third one is a combination of blue and green to give us a medium contrast paper. With multi-grade paper, we have one box of paper that can produce up to 5 contrast grades, so we don't have to buy a bunch of different paper to produce different results. Now, why is this helpful? Well, if I'm shooting with roll film, such as 35 millimeter, I may have some exposure variance where I might have a lower exposed negative and a slightly overexposed negative, and those two negatives are going to have a different contrast. Or I might have different lighting situations on the same roll. I might have a high contrast bright lighting situation, and I might have a low contrast lighting situation, and even if I expose properly, I'm going to have to develop in a way that I'm going to have to manage the contrast in the darkroom to adjust for that high contrast lighting or low contrast lighting. So as a result, most of us are working with multi-grade papers today because they allow us to not only print up to 5 different contrast grades within a single box of paper, but we can do something else known as split contrast printing, which allows us to have some really creative controls in the darkroom to make what I call expressive prints, where we can control contrast locally in different parts of our image by using different filters for different areas of the print. So as you see behind me here is you see a range of filters that go from yellow all the way down to a deep magenta. And there's a reason for that, because these are the colors that are opposite the blue and the green emulsions. So if I use the magenta filter like this one here, it's going to block green, which means I'm going to have a higher contrast blue emulsion activated more than the green emulsion on my paper. On the other hand, if I use yellow, a deep yellow filter, I'm going to block the blue light from hitting that blue high contrast emulsion, and I'm going to make a print that's lower in contrast because it's using mostly the green emulsion. So this is a really nice set of options that we have for printing. We use what are known as the Polymax filter set or multi-grade filter set or multi-contrast filter set. There's no surprise that we are using a paper that's orthochromatic in the darkroom. The reason being is we started out with, if you look at early historic film emulsions, wet plate photography was orthochromatic. So the fact that that material was blue sensitive meant that if we used red lights, we could work in the darkroom with a light on and see what we're doing. So most darkroom safe lights started out in the red category or the amber category, those warm color spectrums that we work with in the darkroom. So when it came to making modern paper emulsions, we were able to add some colorized sensitive dyes to the emulsions to choose what portions of the color spectrum of the light source are going to impact that paper emulsion. So by utilizing, we've already got red and amber safe lights in the darkroom, made it very simple for manufacturers to say we're going to make our paper emulsions orthochromatic so that we can work under those same safe lights. So there are numerous varieties of paper stocks available out there because each one will have a slightly different look. As a general starting point, I do highly recommend working with something that's really well developed, been around for quite a while, and that's the Ilford RC paper. And then once you've mastered that, go ahead and experiment with some of the other brands of paper. You can also, as a student, if you're on a budget, utilize Freestyle has a brand of paper under their house name of Arista that is a very economical paper. The tone scale is going to be slightly different, but it produces really wonderful results. There's also, locally, we have a vendor that supplies Kentmere products, and the Kentmere brand of papers is actually quite a lovely brand of paper in that it produces prints that have a very old style feel to it. There's slightly softer contrast scale to them as well, which could be really pleasing if your primary subject matter is going to be people and portraits. So if you're photographing landscapes and you want that Ansel Adams look, you might try a cool tone paper. If you are a generalist or you're photographing still lifes and you just want something that's a neutral tone, then I would go with a neutral tone paper. And if I'm doing portraits, I might go with a softer to slightly warm tone paper. And many paper manufacturers will offer their papers in those varieties of what we call color tones, or the color of the black and white tint. So to summarize the characteristics of paper that are the variables that we look at when determining what kind of image we're making, we have the paper base itself, whether it's fiber or resin coated. We have the surface quality or the texture of the paper, whether it's a high gloss, semi-gloss, a pearl finish, or a flat matte finish. And we have the tonality or the tone scale or the contrast of the paper as to how fast it goes from paper white to maximum black. When we talk about paper weight, we talk about just the intangible communication of the material that we're dealing with. And in fact, that's what making darkroom prints is really about, is that we're making a physical object out of an image. And so when you see an image on a computer screen, it just doesn't have the same meaning as when you see it on paper. And when you think about paper arts and how, whether it's a pencil drawing, an ink drawing, or an oil painting, the substrates impact our feeling, our emotive quality associated with those images. And so that's where I get real excited about working with real paper-based products in the darkroom to make real physical prints that convey a sense of something else, if you will. There's something symbolic added to the image when we work with real physical materials. Ultimately, when it comes to selecting a paper, there's really only one criteria. Buy what you can afford and learn how to make the best prints you can possibly make with that material. There is no such thing as a bad black and white paper to work with.